In the words of Franklin D Roosevelt, rebellion against tyrants is obedience to God. Welcome to Casual History. Today we dive into the tale of intrigue, betrayal, and gunpowder with the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. Let's get into it. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Casual History. My name is Jacob, and I have my co-host, as always, Jeffrey here with me. Jeffrey, how you doing, man?
Doing great. First podcast of 2024. I'm stoked.
Yeah, nice little break, but I'm glad we're back. I've been itching to kind of get through this kind of transition period. I've actually moved during this time, and so now I'm finally settled and feel good to kind of jump right back into the podcast again.
He's not officially under the Texas sun, but for now, Jacob
For
is
now.
in big old Texas.
Yep. So if you guys have recommendations for food places I should visit, just let me know because I'm down for it all and I'm ready to explore the state, guys. So
Yeah, and before we get into the meat of the story today, I do want to say feel free to give us a like, rating, and feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube.
heck yeah. All right. So we can jump right in. But my story this week is about an assassination attempt. So it's going to be a really fun, interesting story, something that I had no clue about. Very fun and interesting.
Right off the bat, assassination attempt, fun, and I mean, it's definitely interesting.
The topics that we cover on our podcast are always dark and always have like a lot of violence in them, but like yet I have so much fun. So it's really interesting to kind of describe it because I'm excited. I don't know what it says about me. But yeah, so we can jump in. But again, this story was something that I had never heard before, so I'm excited to kind of share this with you as well, what I've learned. I'm going to give you the name of this thing and you just tell me if you've heard anything about this or if there's something that you have previous knowledge of. But the story is actually around the Gunpowder Plot. Any ideas?
Gunpowder is involved, and there's a plot.
Got it. You have never heard this before.
No, I've never heard of this.
Okay, good. So this is going to be a really entertaining story for you too then, because again, I kind of got drawn into this story as soon as I started on it. So we can kind of start by setting the scene a little bit. So in 1605, England was more than just a kingdom. It was a tinderbox of religious and political tensions ready to ignite. The fabric of society was intricately woven with threads of fear, suspicion, and unrest, predominantly due to the rift between the Catholics and the Protestants. This story explores the combustible environment that sets the stage for history's most notorious assassination attempts, the Gunpowder Plot. The religious turmoil in England had its roots in the Reformation, a movement that had reshaped Europe. Under Henry VIII, England had broken away from the Catholic Church, establishing the Church of England and setting the stage for decades of religious conflict. By the early 17th century, the Protestant Reformation had firmly taken hold, leaving Catholics marginalized, prosecuted, and often regarded as enemies of the state. This religious divide was not just a matter of personal belief, but it was intertwined with issues of power, loyalty, and national identity.
Wow.
So the ascension of King James I to the England throne in 1603 was a beacon of hope for the Catholic minority. James succeeding Queen Elizabeth I was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and a Catholic martyr, which led many Catholics to optimistically anticipate a more lenient stance on religious tolerance. However, this hope was very short-lived. James determined to strengthen the unity of his kingdom and under pressure from the Protestant majority, upheld and even intensified many of the anti-Catholic laws. This reign saw the continuation of oppressive practices such as recusatory fines, where Catholics were fined for not attending Protestant services, and the enforcement of laws that restricted Catholic worship and education.
Wow.
Really, really dark stuff. And again, kind of how, right, like America was founded anyway for religious freedom. And so,
Right.
yeah, there's lots of shades here of all those things.
So one of the interesting pieces that you just mentioned, do you know why Henry VIII broke away from Catholicism?
Yeah, so my initial understanding and what I think I know is because he wanted a divorce And because of his religion, he could not get a divorce underneath that. And so he just decided, you know what? Screw that. I'm just going to start my own and start my own church, which
Yeah.
led to a lot of complications for everybody. But that's my brief understanding. I also like, again, I'm probably missing a piece of this. I don't know if he found like another wife or if he just wanted a divorce from his current wife. One of those reasons. And so that's literally the entire reason he started his own church.
Wow.
With that, right, the backdrop of broken promises and intensified persecution created a climate ripe for rebellion. Catholics in England found themselves grappling with a harsh reality, living in a country where their faith was not just marginalized, but it was actively suppressed. The Gunpowder Plot needs to be understood against this backdrop of deep religious division and persecution. It was not an isolated act of extremism, but the culmination of decades of growing despair and frustration among English Catholics. So the sense of desperation was further fueled by international events. The Protestants' Dutch republics' ongoing struggle for independence from their Catholic Spain, and the brutal conflicts of the 30 Years' War on the continent. And also, even the fear of the Spanish invasion heightened the sense of religious siege mentality amongst English Protestants. This international religious conflict held local repercussions, exacerbating the fear and suspicion towards Catholics in England. So there were a lot of factors going on. And again, like you can see how that suppression of religion can cause people to act out against that suppression.
Absolutely. And I don't want to side tangent too much, but can I go back to the Henry VIII thing? Because I looked
Sure.
up
Yeah.
something. I just find it interesting. I want to put it in there. It says the loss of interest in Catherine, his wife, was partly because Henry believed that his lack of heir was punishment from God for marrying his brother's wife. And he wanted to
Oh,
marry Anne Boleyn and believed she could produce an heir, but he was still married to Catherine. But then he discovered that Anne was pregnant, and so Henry arranged to marry her in secret at Whitehall Palace. And this is what marked the beginning of the break with Rome. It
wow.
says Henry asked Pope Clement for his marriage to Catherine to be dissolved, but the Pope would not agree. And part of the reason that the Pope refused was because Charles, the Holy Roman Emperor, had taken control of Rome, and Charles was Catherine's nephew. That's the family
Oh
tie I was trying to
my.
get to.
Wow. I feel like we do this every story, but like I think King Henry VIII also deserves his own podcast. I think there's so much to that. He kind of created this rift between everybody there. Some of this stuff is also, eventually what led to America deciding, hey, we need to go escape and find religious freedom elsewhere. And so lots of repercussions everywhere, obviously including England, where there was just a huge mess left behind.
Do you know who his daughter? So he ended up, marrying Anne
Okay.
anyway,
Yeah.
and he gets excommunicated, right?
Right.
And he thought he would have a son. They ended up having a daughter, and she became Elizabeth the First.
That makes a lot of sense now. Thank you for the context, actually, because I didn't know how that tied in.
Super interesting. I knew it was connected, but yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're totally fine. So the stage was set for radical action. The Gunpowder Plot, often seen through the lens of its most famous conspirator, Guy Fawkes. I don't know if you've ever heard of that name before. It kind of
Mm-mm.
rang a bell for me. Was in reality a desperate, albeit extreme, response to systematic religious persecution.
Oh yes, there's a whole movie on Guy Fawkes with the mask.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Where the mask comes from? What's the hacker group? Anonymous. That mask is of Guy Fawkes.
Really? So
Yes.
somehow Anonymous is tied into this. See, this is why we do this podcast because there's so many like things that are tied to today into these stories.
The newfound version or a version of fighting a battle, right? Where the battle is moved online and Anonymous supposedly, I don't know. You can have feelings about Anonymous. They're just a hacker group basically. But anytime they post a video, they're in the Guy Fawkes mask, which obviously makes so much more sense to me on
Wow.
why they're using that mask.
I had no idea that that was the reference. That's wild. Okay.
Crazy.
That's amazing. So it was a plot born from a world where being a Catholic was not just a matter of faith, but a dangerous and defiant act against the state. This next section kind of lays the groundwork for understanding the motivations that drove men like Robert Catesby, the true architect of the plot, to conceive such a drastic plan. As we kind of dive deeper into the story, it becomes clear that this was just more than just a failed assassination attempt. It was a reflection of a deeply fractured society, struggling with questions of faith, loyalty, and the right to resist oppression. Kind of moving into some of the main players, right, of this. So obviously I mentioned Guy Fawkes, but there's another man who was the great mastermind, the puppeteer behind this entire plot. And so at the forefront was Robert Catesby, a man whose name is often overshadowed by the more infamous Guy Fawkes. Catesby was born into a prominent Catholic family in 1572, experienced firsthand the oppressive measures against Catholics. His father had been imprisoned for refusing to conform to the Anglican Church, and this personal history of religious persecution deeply influenced Catesby's worldview. How could it not? Catesby was charismatic, persuasive, and deeply committed to his Catholic faith. He was also a man of considerable means, which helped finance the early stages of this plot. His leadership was crucial. It was Catesby who conceived the idea of the plot and who brought together the group of conspirators. He envisioned a dramatic and violent statement against the king and his parliament, a statement that he would hope would ignite the Catholic uprising across England. So this man had really big dreams, and he was willing to put his money where his mouth was. So to talk a little bit more about Guy Fawkes as well, Guy Fawkes in many ways was the face of the entire operation. He was born in York in 1570. Fawkes had converted to Catholicism and fought in the 80 Years' War alongside of Catholic Spain against the Protestant Dutch Republic. His military experience, particularly in explosives, made him an invaluable asset to this plot. Fawkes was tasked with the critical role of igniting the gunpowder. Seems easy enough, right? But there's obviously a ton that goes into this story. So Thomas Percy, a relative of Earl of Northumberland, was another key figure. His access to the upper echelons of society, including a connection to the king himself, provided the group with a critical information and opportunities. Percy was responsible for renting the cellar underneath the House of Lords where the gunpowder was to be stored. Other conspirators included Thomas Wintour, a well-traveled, multilingual man, and John Wright, known for his skills with the sword. Each member brought their own unique strengths and resources to this plot, forming a network of men united by a common cause, but driven by diverse personal histories and motivations. So there's even a crew, Jeffrey, in this one, like Ocean's 11, for this plan.
How do we view them? Do we view them as terrorists, or like they're planning to make a statement, I assume, by killing someone or blowing something up?
That's the $1 million question. So obviously, as the kind of worldview is set up, right, the plot was to kill. So the plot was actually something, it says, the plan was audacious as it was simple. It was to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament. So he was going to basically Game of Thrones this and, yeah, the whole building go down. So, yes, that is really the $1 million question. And I think that's really up for everybody listening to decide as well for themselves where you stand on this. But obviously there's a ton of turmoil that happens before this. Obviously doesn't justify violence necessarily, but there's a lot of different factors that go into this plot.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Just the setup alone, I'm thinking, how do I perceive this? Because, yeah, there's a crew, but there's a crew of people that want to destroy or kill something. So I'm like,
Right.
How do I view this? Obviously, they're being oppressed and they need to make a statement to change or correct this.
Right. And in their view, this is their way of, again, acting out against where normally they could never, creating that first wave, shooting the first shot. Obviously, a lot that goes into that. Even myself is something that I don't really know for sure where I completely stand on the sentiment.
Even after?
Well, even after, it's still the setup, right? It's still about oppression of religion. And so there's validity to people acting out against people that are trying to stomp that out. Obviously, I don't personally condone any sort of violence. And so it's definitely what do you guys think? How do you perceive this moving forward?
Yeah, interesting.
So after that, we're going to get into the actual story and the day of this plot coming up after this ad break.
Thanks for listening to that ad. It helps support the podcast, helps support Jacob and myself, keep this thing going. and keep us talking about interesting subjects like today, Jacob, the one you brought in.
That's right.
And before we jump in, though, a quick reminder, if you want to give us a rating, review, and want to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Casual X History, or on social media, Casual X History, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, the works.
I love it. All right, so let's jump back into where we left off. So obviously I described what this plot was going to be. So it's something super audacious. Again, very Game of Thrones-esque. They were basically going to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament. So this event was chosen for its symbolic value, right? It was one of the few occasions when the king, his heirs, and a majority of the Protestant aristocracy and clergy would all be in one place. The conspirators planned to ignite barrels of gunpowder placed in the cellar directly below the House of Lords. So the acquisition of this cellar was a stroke of luck. Percy used his connections, securing a lease on the undercroft located beneath the House of Lords. Over the months leading up to November 5th of 1605, the conspirators stockpiled 36 barrels of gunpowder in the cellar, an amount sufficient to obliterate the Parliament building and everyone in it. So that is a huge amount of gunpowder underneath it. The plot was not just about the assassination of King James I. It was a statement intended to resonate across the divided nation. The conspirators hoped that the death of the king and his parliament would trigger a revolt, leading to the installation of a Catholic monarch. It was a desperate and radical plan born out of years of systematic persecution and profound sense of injustice.
Yeah, I mean, if you kill everyone, yeah, there's no way there's not a reshaping of what's going on.
Like a vacuum of power. But they hoped that
Yeah.
people rose up against them, that this was just the first shot across the bow, but again, changed things.
What a plan.
Right. It was pretty audacious. And it sounded like from the crew, the motley crew that we just described, too, that he kind of had all the specialists in place, right?
Yeah.
Including Guy Fawkes, who was supposed to be the one to ignite the gunpowder. To begin the preparations, right, and talk about that. As November 5th of 1605 approached, the conspirators intensified their efforts. Secrecy and precision were paramount. The gunpowder, a commodity monitored by the state, had to be acquired and stored without arousing suspicion. The cellar beneath the House of Lords, secured by Thomas Percy, became the focal point of their plan. Here, hidden underneath piles of firewood and coal, lay the barrels of gunpowder, enough to cause the devastation unprecedented in English history. So the conspirators understood the magnitude of their plot, but this act would decimate the ruling class and change the course of English history. Every step was taken with profound awareness of the risks involved, both personally and for the Catholic community at large. So this plan, however, had a twist. So when it actually began to unravel with an unforeseen development, the anonymous letter to Lord Monteagle, sent in October 26th of 1605, this letter, cryptic in its wording, warned them to stay away from Parliament's opening. So someone sent an anonymous letter from outside of there. So I don't know who caught wind of this, who in that chain were told, but someone sent a letter to a member of Parliament there.
Wow. I mean, yeah, you have a group of 13, right?
Right.
Seems like a lot.
And this is their lives on the line, right? If you're caught, this is treason, dude. Like
Right.
this is there's no wiggle room for any of this stuff. So the origins of this actually remains a historical debate, but its impact was immediate and profound. The person himself, Lord Monteagle, the Catholic, presented this letter to Robert Cecil, the Earl of Salisbury, and the King James I's chief minister. The letter set off a chain of investigations, although initially with a degree of skepticism. So people didn't know if the letter was real, if this was a real threat, or just something that the country and how divided it was. This was just something that was, floating around. So the authorities opted for caution, choosing to wait and watch rather than to act on what could be seen as, or could have been, a hoax. For the plotters, though, the letter represented a far worse fear: exposure. So paranoia set in, which is very reasonable. Should they abandon their plan, which had been set in motion for over a year, the decision to proceed was a testament of their resolve, but it also reflected their desperation and cornered mindset of the group. So they decided to move forward anyway. In the days leading up to the 5th of November, London was a city of whispers and shadows. The conspirators moved cautiously, aware that each step could be their undoing. Yet, driven by conviction and the momentum of their cause, they pressed forward. Moving into the actual day in this story. On November 5th of 1605, it began like any other day in London, but beneath the surface, tension simmered, and in the early hours, Guy Fawkes was stationed in the cellar underneath the House of the Lords, ready to light the fuse on what would change the course of history. His capture, however, would instead mark the unraveling of a meticulously laid plan. So the authorities, acting on the suspicions raised by that letter, conducted a search of the Parliament buildings, and in the early hours, Sir Thomas Cunvitt, a justice of the peace, discovered Fawkes disguised and guarding the gunpowder, and Fawkes was arrested, and his plot was ultimately foiled. The arrest of Guy Fawkes actually sent shockwaves through London. The discovery of the plot just hours before its intended execution exposed a conspiracy of unimaginable magnitude. King James I, upon learning of this failed assassination attempt, praised divine intervention for his salvation. The government's response was swift and merciless. An intense investigation ensued, leading to the arrest of all of the other conspirators. Robert Catesby, the mastermind, was killed in a shootout in the Holtreby House, Satchesfordshire, where some of the plotters had fled initially. The captured conspirators faced trials that were little more than formalities, right? I mean, my gosh, you were planning on assassinating everyone.
There's no trial. It's just an
Yeah,
execution.
exactly. So the verdict was a foregone conclusion: guilty of high treason. The punishments were brutal and executions that were designed to be as gruesome and as public as possible, serving a warning to anybody who might dare plot against the crown. So the Gunpowder Plot failure had dire consequences for the Catholic community in England. The already harsh laws against Catholics were further tightened, and a climate of fear and suspicion permeated through society. The plot did not just fail the status quo, it worsened conditions for those it was meant to uplift. So again, regardless of what side you're on, this created havoc across the whole country. So the Gunpowder Plot, while the failure and its immediate objective left an indelible mark on British history and culture, its aftermath resonated through centuries, influencing politics, religion, and societal norms.
I have a theory.
Yeah, go for it.
My theory is, and this will jump us into a side tangent, I'm sure.
Okay, let's do it.
The letter that was
Yeah,
sent.
who could have sent that letter?
Someone from the future.
Oh, okay.
The apocalyptic future where England is no longer in power. Somehow this changed the rules of things.
Butterfly effect.
They send the letter to
try to
stop this from happening, and the reign continues and everything ends up how we're in it right now. Or maybe it's a separate thread. Maybe it's a separate alternate reality.
Wow.
Don't want to get too crazy here.
That's a great conspiracy you just landed. I can't wait to see that on YouTube with a million different videos.
I mean, come on, how perfect of a setup is that, right? They have this incredible plan that no one should know about, and randomly an anonymous letter was sent. Not someone face to face, not someone wanting a reward for telling them about this. Someone sent a letter who didn't want to be known.
Or just someone that they talked to, like getting gunpowder. It was something that the state monitored very closely. So anybody in that chain could have, again, saw that something was suspicious and wrote a letter.
I like my theory better, but yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it's not like there wasn't people involved. They obviously tried to keep it as secret as possible, but something like this, again, with items that are monitored, it honestly could have been them.
That makes sense. But I still think there's a possibility.
Someone from the future. Tell me you've seen the movie Deja Vu, because that's exactly...
Is it?
It's kind of the plot. It's a time travel movie, which I am an absolute sucker for. But it's Denzel Washington. If you guys haven't seen that movie, it's great. It's underrated. I don't know. I don't hear very many people talking about it, but it's called Deja Vu. And the whole theory is they have, like, the government builds a machine where they can see exactly like 48 hours in the past, but it's still linear to their time. Once it passes that 48 hours, it's gone, but they can affect it. And he essentially tries to send a letter to change the events that were going to happen. And so
we'll stop there.
Okay, that's fine. So we can kind of continue on just discussing what the heck happened after all this was foiled, right? How many ripples did this really ultimately affect in the country? So this actually led to the government's crackdown on Catholics, and it just intensified that. New laws were enacted, further restricting Catholic rights to practice their religion and participate in public life. This plot reinforced the Protestants' establishment's narrative that the Catholic treachery, justifying harsher measures and surveillance against them. This period marked a significant setback in the quest for religious tolerance in England, entrenching divisions that would last for generations. So, King James I's response to the plot also had political ramifications. He had used the event to consolidate his power, emphasizing the divine right of the kings and framing his survival as a miracle. This bolstered royal authority, and it also contributed to the growing tensions between the monarchy and the parliament that would later culminate in the English Civil War. Lots of different threads. Again, a butterfly effect happened, right? Not the one that they wanted to happen. So the cultural legacy of the Gunpowder Plot is perhaps most visibly commemorated in the annual Guy Fawkes Night celebrations on November 5th. So I didn't even know that was a thing. So I'm learning this as well. So bonfires, effigy burnings, and fireworks serve as a vivid reminder of the plot's failure. While originally a celebration of the monarch's survival, over time, it has evolved. So in modern culture, Guy Fawkes has become a symbol of rebellion and protest against tyranny and oppression, partly due to his portrayal in various literary and media representations. So just like those movies and stuff
Vendetta.
that you've seen.
Yeah.
Right, on that stuff. Again, the story of the Gunpowder Plot continues to be relevant today, offering a historical lens through which the view of contemporary issues of extremism, terrorism, and the impact of religious and political persecution. It raises complex questions about the nature of resistance against oppression, the line between terrorism and freedom fighting, and the consequences of radical action. This plot also serves a cautionary tale, right, against the dangers of marginalizing entire communities. Also underscores the importance of inclusive and tolerant governance and potential consequences of systematic persecution. Obviously, really huge topics. History repeats itself a lot. There's lots across the world, across history, where this has been the case. And so, again, a fascinating story that I didn't know anything about, which is wild to me. Because, again, if this had gone through, this would have been in everybody's history books.
Right.
This would have been a huge, huge deal.
Yeah, great story. Good layers there. Obviously, how you could take this in many different directions and how you view them. And this line is thin sometimes. And like that,
For sure.
like, everything would have changed.
Yeah.
In some way.
And we'll never know because that future person sent that letter. So we'll never, we'll never really know what the consequences
we'll never know
were.
what the consequences were, because that person who knew sent that letter and tipped him off. So someone like the English government. So
yeah. Or someone who just saw, 4 suspicious guys and was like, what the heck are they doing with so much gunpowder?
Yeah, they're buying from the same person over and over. And the guy's like, this doesn't
This guy's
happen.
weird. Yeah. What are you using this for?
Right. Well, thanks everyone for another episode of Casual History. We'll be back next week. We're back in full swing with 2024 going forward. And we have a lot of cool ideas and cool things coming up in regards to our YouTube channel, Casual History. You can find us on there. We also been posting lots of shorts and clips, which has been cool to see the response to. Again, I'll reiterate for the third time. Feel free to give us a rating and subscribe. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for coming with us.